Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. This is Carrie Getz. Welcome to another edition of our podcast series, Careers for Women, Trades, and Vets in Tech and Data Centers. And today we've got somebody on the recruiting side who also has some cool tools to help us. Casey, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody about you?
Well, thank you so much for having me today. This is so exciting. I love helping people with their careers, especially early on, to make sure that they are totally aligned with their passions. My name is Casey Hasten. I am an executive recruiter with VIP, the director of recruiting there. One of my many adventures that I do. And so I want to share a little bit about what I've learned from the recruiting industry with you guys.
And we talk about this all the time in this industry. So we have jobs all the way across the board, trades, people that are just starting out that just need to learn a skill that can absolutely start in this industry. We have jobs for people that have 4-year degrees, people in all different walks of life, different parts of life. And I know there's been a bigger push now to stop really just looking for candidates that only have degrees. They've dropped that requirement for most of our jobs because it's not really necessary for most of our jobs, to be fair. How have you seen some of those changes in recruiting, and what are some of the changes you see coming both from the employer side and from the recruitee side to sort of marry in the middle there?
Yeah, so one of the things now, I specialize in accounting and finance, so we're really not seeing those degree requirements being dropped yet. Um, and I know a lot of people, they'll be, have 10 or 15 years in the field, but still most of my clients from the recruiting side still do require those degrees. But I am seeing a push, and I'm one of those people. I'll tell you about that here in a second, for people going to get specialized certifications or trade school, like you said, rather than going to get a 4-year degree in basket weaving or something like that. One of the things that I've done recently is, I was looking to, I'm a consummate student. I'm always wanting to learn. And I was looking to go back to maybe get my master's and even go on to get my doctorate. And I started looking, you know, and they don't really apply to what I'm doing now. So rather than going back to a traditional university, I am selecting certain skills and certifications to put into my tool belt. So my most recent certification that I'm working on is in neuro linguistic programming, which is very specific to what I do. It helps me when I'm coaching candidates. It helps me teach them and coach them for the interview. All these little brain hacks work.
Yeah, and that's one thing I think people forget about is the amount of certifications and other ways there are to get educated. Not all paths lead to a university. As a matter of fact, I would argue some people would rather gouge their eye out with a spoon than go to college because they didn't have a great high school experience or for something else. And I think all of those paths and avenues need to be open. And I think we have a better workforce when we use those avenues because we have people, instead of saying, here's a solution to a problem, now we can say, here's the problem, how would you solve it? And people from different walks of life, different thought processes, different ways of approaching a problem are all going to come up with different solutions. And I think at the end of the day, we come up with a better solution by embracing a lot of those. So let's talk about, I know you started this workbook to kind of help people on their career pathway. Talk a little bit about that notebook and the process that you went in and kind of how that helps in the recruiting bit.
So it's a journal, it's a quarterly journal, and I am a journal junkie. And how it came about, several pivotal moments, which kind of spurred the existence of this journal. It's called Awaken Your Potential. And I am on a mission to help a billion people wake up. And yes, that's billion with a B. It doesn't have to be direct contact, but it can be through the ripple effect. And really what it is getting very clear with who you are. And so part of the reason why that came about was talking about going to school. I went to school and ended up getting a degree for something that I had no desire to do. I was so misaligned with my career. And I think by learning who you are at the core and getting really familiar with what you're passionate about is going to help you get aligned with your career. So I was in a career for 20 years in accounting. And I mean, anybody that knows me today knows that that is totally not what I'm wired to do. I am wired to help people, to be out there, to inspire. And so, how the journal came about was I actually went to coaching school about 5 years ago. And I had already been an avid journaler, but this really amped it. So I started journaling about every area of my life. And as I did that, I started really getting clarity about who I was and what I wanted to do. And so I wanted a journal that was all inclusive for every area of my life. So I wasn't carrying around 4 or 5 different journals. And went to the marketplace to look for it and found it didn't exist. And so I was just like, as I do with everything, I just throw an idea out there and then I try to figure out later how it's going to work, right? I was like, well, I'll just design one. And that became a 3-year adventure to getting this thing to market, which we published it last September. And it has just really, it covers every area of your life, from mindset to finance. And why that's so important is because as you go through the mindset and you identify what your core values are and you identify what your internal rules are, how you make decisions on a minute by minute basis, it helps you to formulate, what do you want to do with this information? And there's also an assessment that I've included within this to help you out that will help you identify how you're wired internally. And then you can align. Like for me, I am like 5% of what I need to be an accountant internally. And doesn't mean I can't do it. It just means I'm not wired to do it. So I'm going to probably struggle a little bit more than someone who is wired to do accounting on a daily basis.
Well, and that's a big problem that we have in the United States too. You figure out what you're kind of wired to do, but we don't have exposure to a lot of the jobs. That's part of the reason that I wrote the book, is because a lot of people are never even presented with these opportunities for careers, period, right? In the industry or anywhere else. And so I think that it's really important for people to kind of check out opportunities that are out of anything that you've been presented with in your lifetime, right? Because we're only going to be presented with what the people that can present them to us have been exposed to. And so if something's out of that frame of reference, you've got to look a little bit farther and look a little bit wider to sort of figure those out. And I feel like a lot of those tools aren't just really out there in the average domain, or people don't know where to find them anyway. What do you think?
I would agree. And I think that a lot of times people are told which direction they want to go. Like me, I was told, well, you're good at math. You should go into accounting. That's what you should do. And then when I switched from accounting and I was a CFO, it's not like I was not good at it. It's just I wasn't fulfilled at it. And when I switched from accounting to recruiting, which I had no idea that this was a thing, right? I'd never worked with recruiters before. It was unbelievable how fulfilling it was for me to help people find jobs, right? And to expose them to other areas. And it even goes further now because I've wrapped coaching into the recruiting journey. And now I love it when I get to talk to people and I help them make sure this is the route they want to go on. Because if it hadn't been for that recruiter that talked to me when I was looking for a new job, and she looked at me, she goes, Casey, you don't even like accounting. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And she's like, try recruiting with me a little bit. And my parents thought I was insane. My parents who told me you should go be an accountant, they thought I was insane. And so I really want to challenge people to explore what opportunities are out there, but first explore what you want to do. Don't let other people tell you what you want to do. Figure out what you want to do.
Well, that's really important, and I think we see this in society. The average 4-year degree now takes 5 to 6 years. It's not 4 anymore. If you look at the number of people that are actually in the job that they worked really, really hard for their degree towards, I think I read somewhere not too long ago that it's only 13% of the population are working in the job that they got their degree in. So clearly
Wow.
people acted on a degree based on a lot of that maybe I should kind of things, and later found out it not to be everything that they wanted it to be. So how do you think we change some of these things around to make it different, starting out from a high school perspective? How do we reach people younger and earlier, and even early career, to say, this is, maybe you did this, but if you didn't like it, let's pivot. Let's find something else.
Yeah, and I think pivot is the word. Pivot quickly. Don't be afraid to go in a different direction if that is going to make you happy. I think a lot of times we're held back by that fear of the unknown, and it can be scary. But probably my best advice to people, especially, and I run a young executive group, and I love it when I can get to them before they get into college, because then I can be like, okay, let's make sure this is what you love to do. And one of the first exercises, other than the assessment that I usually have people do, is sit down and think about what you like to do when you were little. Think about that. And then figure out a way to do what you would do for free, but get paid for it. And that way, when you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I have people that argue with me that say it is still work, but I'm like, but is it? I mean, if you're having fun, is it really work? Because I promise you, I don't work a day in my life.
I mean, it's working that you get paid for it, right?
Yeah.
But ideally, if you love what you're doing, then it does take a lot of the Sunday evening dreads off the table, where you
Mm,
realize, oh no, I got to go back to work tomorrow. I have to, all of those things change. So I do think that and that's not to say that you're going to enjoy your job 100% of the time, because it just doesn't work that way. There's going to be things that you don't like doing. And now, the trick is to make sure that that's not 90% of your day, and that's 10% or 15% of your day. But there's necessary evils that go along with all of that, I think, that we have to just kind of, suck it up and get used to. But I will say that I think hiring is different, firing is different, how we approach jobs and approach subjects are going to be different. I think that just putting yourself out there sometimes is hard enough, especially if it's someplace where you have no experience. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about, say somebody is pivoting.
hmm
Say they were in the finance market where you are, and they're choosing to go somewhere else. What advice would you give that person that's pivoting for how to train up, where to look for jobs, how to present yourself when people are looking for something completely different than you are as a candidate?
So, a couple of things, and I actually just worked with a candidate on this very issue to do a complete pivot from where he was before. And one of the things that I had him do was, first of all, YouTube. Go get certified and go learn the skills that you need to make that pivot, which he did. And the second thing that I would recommend is find a mentor. Find somebody in that space that can help teach you and point you in the right directions to get the information that you need. And then eventually that mentor can help make connections and introductions where if you don't know somebody at a company and you have no relative skill to that job, it's very difficult to even get the interview. However, if you've got a mentor or a networking connection that can vouch for you, that says, look, I've been watching this kid. He has been going to all these different classes to get trained up in this specific skill set so he can make this pivot, then that introduction becomes a lot easier and you're more likely to get that interview. So mentors are incredibly important.
Well, I would say mentors are very important, but so is being a good mentee. I've had mentees in the past that you make all these suggestions, come up with a plan of the day, come up with things they're going to do before the next session, and then the next session they've done literally none of them, or they expect you to be a mind reader, which is also not going to be a successful relationship, right, when you mentor people. So I do think that there's a give and take in that relationship, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And if, as a mentee, if you're not going to be serious about investing in the relationship, don't bother, because that as a mentor, I'm giving my time and my expertise and my knowledge to you. And so I would hope that you would take that, use that, and hopefully benefit from the information that I'm sharing.
Yeah, and I mean, advice is only going to be as good as how you internalize it, right? You can tell somebody you need to go apply yourself in some manner, but how they apply themselves is going to be all the difference in whether that's a success for them or not a success for them. And so I think you have to be very clear on your goals and what you're trying to do. And you also need to not be afraid to ask questions. And I think that's something that we really lack in society, is that it's almost like we put down people for ignorance when everybody's ignorant till we know. We're all ignorant. Put yourself on the same playing field as every other person on the planet, right? I'm ignorant to Mandarin Chinese. I'm ignorant to a ton of stuff. I'm ignorant even to some stuff in my daily life that I probably don't even realize I'm ignorant to. But I think that we have to remove that culture of fear and encourage those questions and encourage somebody, if somebody is considering changing jobs or pivoting, let them shadow you for a day.
Yeah.
Let them shadow you for a week. Think of some of those outside the box things. What other suggestions would you have?
So as far as like people that are pivoting in their career, I would definitely, like I said, the assessment I think is going to be my greatest suggestion, is to really get to know who you are internally so that you can find those avenues that'll line up with who you are and what you are naturally inclined to do. Networking. I am a huge advocate of networking, which is I run a networking organization here locally, and then have several subgroups, special interest groups within that organization, one of which are the young executives, where we host their own happy hour. We call it their happy educational hour. But learn to network, get out there so that you build that bridge before you need it. And that's a lot of where you're going to find your mentors, you're going to find your coaches, you're going to find those people that can make those introductions for you when you do want to make a pivot, if you want to make a pivot.
Yeah, I would say you are nothing without your network. I read not too long ago that 85% of jobs are filled through networking. Only
Yep.
15% are filled through somebody putting out some kind of an application. So that's pretty crazy right there.
Yeah.
I feel like we don't do a good enough job. And certainly after COVID, some of the networks have disappeared a little bit. I started running them over Teams calls during COVID and still run one that goes once a month. And I know that there's a lot of other ones in the industry too, and there's ones in other industries. But I will say this, as far as your network goes, you are only as good as what you put into your network too, because nobody's going to continue to help you and you give nothing in return, because it becomes very one-sided. So talk about how you coach your young executives on how to be that half of it, how to be the better part of the network when they feel like they really don't have anything to contribute yet.
Well, the first thing that I usually share with my young executives are 2 books. And I have them read these 2 books. The first one is The Miracle Morning, which is all about setting your day up for success. But the second book is the one that really speaks to the networking persona, so to speak. And that's called The Go-Giver. Have you read that book?
I have not.
It is an amazing book, and it talks about the 5 laws of stratospheric success. And they are all about give and take, right? And most of the laws are about giving. It's like the law of value, the law of compensation. But the last law, and it's the one I struggle with the most, is the law of reciprocity. Because as much as you give, you need to be able to receive as well. And I just want to be the go-giver all the time. I want to be the one giving value first. That's my number one internal rule, is give value first.
Right. So how do you do that though? If you take a young person and you're going to introduce them to a network, they're brand new to an industry, brand new to this network, how do they become a go-giver? What do they have to give? What do you suggest that they put out there on the table?
I can give you a very real example. We just had a young man, he's 24 years old, join the young executives, but before he did, he attended one of our happy educational hours. And he just started talking about what he was doing, and he runs a technology company. And he just mentioned, he goes, if I can help in any way, let me know. Well, don't ever say that to me, because I will find a way for you to help. We are a network, or we're an organization of volunteers. And it just so happened that I'm implementing a new CRM for our networking organization. And I am technologically blind. I that's not my lane, and I know that. But I'm a big believer in outsourcing your weaknesses too. And so this young man came to me and he was just telling me what he did. And I was like, okay, you want to help? I need help with this CRM system. And he goes, okay. And I mean, he dug in, he did all the research for me, came up, sent me a 3-page report on why I should go with this specific CRM. And then when I had questions, he sent me another 3-page report on my answers to my questions. So, I mean, and now he's digging in so hard that he just accepted a seat on our board of directors.
Don't realize that we all have something to offer, even if it's a minute of kindness, even if it's volunteering, even putting together a newsletter, mailing envelopes, something. There's always something that you can give. And once you start creating those resources, I can 100% guarantee you I would be nothing without my network. Nothing. I have an amazing network of people and wouldn't trade them for anything in the world, you know?
Well, and here's the thing, because he came in, and that's a really extreme example. This kid is just hungry to serve, right? But because he did that, he can ask me for any introduction in my network, and the answer is always yes.
Sure.
That's what happens when you build a good network.
Yep. Yeah, and they are so invaluable, both for yourself and people you're trying to help. And actually, people don't realize there's money to be made in networks too. A lot of networks have finder's fees if they're looking for employees. Your own company probably has finder's fees if you can bring other people online, because it's hard to find people nowadays. There's so many open jobs right now and not enough people to go in them.
Yeah, and we are seeing just a little bit of a slowdown in the market right now. I'm not sure if that's going to pick back up, but it has slowed down just a little bit. But we do pay finder's fees for people if they refer candidates or refer jobs to us, or, whatever, because we want to say thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that is kind of part of the way the world goes around, but it definitely helps. And I will say that job hunting is probably worse than dating. I'm not sure which one is worse. They're both pretty horrible as far as, having to take rejection and all that kind of stuff. But I would say as you go through the mire of all the job training and people tell you how to act on interviews and the right things to say and the wrong things to say and the right way to dress, the wrong way to dress. Give some folks that are out there looking some tips on the best thing they can do, best foot forward finding a job.
Well, let's talk about when you get the interview. So I always tell my candidates when I'm prepping them for their interview that your interview begins the moment you enter the parking lot. Make sure that you are on your best behavior and that you're not. And I'll give you an example. So I had one of my hiring managers call me one time when, and this was an older candidate too, and they were watching him as soon as he got out of the car. And he was looking in everybody's car as he walked by. And it really creeped the hiring manager out. Needless to say, he didn't get the job. And the guy had no idea that his interview had already started before he walked through the door. So, but definitely if you're doing in-person interviews, you want to make sure that your interview starts the moment you enter the parking lot. You want to make sure that you're dressed appropriately. Obviously, don't wear too much perfume, if any. And you want to be sure that when you walk in that you are giving that good handshake but not too firm. I can't stand it when people shake my hand and they grind my bones together, right? But and what that does whenever you shake someone's hand, that releases endorphins, right? And that helps to build rapport. And it's even better if you can like shake the hand and then kind of cup the elbow. You know what I'm talking about? That little move?
Yeah.
Because that's almost like a mini hug and it releases more endorphins, right? There are some techniques that you can use, laughing, smiling, all these things release those endorphins and help to build rapport with the person that you're communicating with. And I think just, being your authentic self whenever you're in the interview. I know a lot of times people are like, well, what's the person like? I want to mirror them or mimic them. And I'm like, but do you want to have to show up and pretend to be somebody you're not every time you go to work? If you don't get hired because you're being you, that's probably not the right place for you.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Well, and I think that's important too. I think there's a lot of people out there that grab onto the first job they can find because they need a job and it's not the right fit. And then it's difficult to exit it right. And then you also have to worry about looking like a job hopper on your resume
Yep.
too, because you've hopped around to too many. So I think it's really important for young people to understand when you're interviewing with a company, you're interviewing the company just as much as the company's interviewing you. And you need to make sure it's your career, it's your happiness, it's your work-life balance, it's your everything. You need to make sure that that this job is going to work for you too, and not the other way around, that it's all one-sided.
Yeah. I just had that happen with one of my candidates, and it was so unfortunate. I mean, she had had such great tenure with her company before, and she ended up, making a move. It wasn't the right move. And so 6 months later, she hopped to another one. And we see that a lot with people that have been with a company for a long time, because it's kind of like a culture shock when they go to that new company. And
Oh,
so
sure.
it may not be that the company's not a right fit. It's just they're trying to recreate what they had from the last company into this company, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, everybody has a different dynamic, and it's even different dynamics if you go to a small mom and pop shop versus a big publicly traded company. Rules and procedures are different. I think that's an important question when you're interviewing. What is my day going to look like? What's the expectation what's the expectation if you're in sales or something? What's the expectation of when I'll hit that number? Are you going to help me to hit that number? What's the training programs? What's involved? What are you going to do to help me be successful? Is just as important as what can I do to help you be successful.
Well, and you just brought up a really good point about the difference between like a publicly traded company and a small company. I think each person needs to evaluate where they will most likely find the most satisfaction. I'm a prime example of that. When I switched to recruiting, I went to a very, very large company for my first recruiting experience, and it was good because they had all the training in place, right? But it was also there was so much red tape to get anything done. And I'm not a tape kind of girl. When I have an idea, I want to move quick. So I needed a company that was just a little bit more nimble. And so I ended up going to a small, like the other company had 86 offices across the US. The company I'm with now has one. Actually, we're about to open a second one, but it's small. And if I want, like, when I had the idea about our company podcast, I walked right into the managing director's office and said, "Hey, I have this idea." And I could get feedback immediately, where I couldn't have done that at the other company. It would have had to go up the chain, up the chain, up the chain, up the chain. It would have taken years.
Well, yeah, and I can tell you just from booking guests on podcasts, large publicly traded companies, a lot of them want all the questions and they want approval to make sure, because somebody's saying something on behalf of the company, and I mean, there is definitely a layer of that if you have no patience for it, you should probably just be aware of before you get to work for a big publicly traded company, because there is some of that, right? But
Exactly.
but I think, there's different jobs for different people, and there's no saying that you're a bad person because you didn't have a good fit. Just like you're not a bad person if you got a divorce, right? Sometimes you think it's going to work and it doesn't work. So let's talk a little bit about what advice would you give somebody that maybe got let go from their last job or had a bad
Mm.
experience in the last job? What do you tell a new employer about the reason that you left that last job?
Yeah, the first thing that I would tell you is you need to be honest, but not brutally honest. Some people want to trash the last company. They want to really, just not take any kind of responsibility for what happened. Never lie. We don't. You don't want to lie because you will get found out. So if I have somebody that was fired or let go from a prior company, first I want to understand why, and then we're going to reframe that to not lie, but not focus on the negative aspects of why you were let go. I was trying to think of a recent example of someone that was let go. Um, and none's coming to mind, although I have dealt with those people before. But I think just being honest about what happened, um, but with a positive spin to it. Let's say you got fired because you were late for work all the time. And, that's something that that's probably not the best example because that's a character flaw if you're late for work all the time. But maybe you could say, look, I accept responsibility that I was not showing up as my best self. And I have taken steps to work on that. And I am going to do my very best to show up as my authentic self, as my true self, to do the best job I can for you going forward.
See, there's a good thing. I think ownership, and we go back to that culture of fear, right? People are so
Mm.
afraid to give themselves grace if you mess up. We all mess up. There's nobody on this planet that has not messed up. Nobody. And I think you do. You have to give yourself grace for that, and you have to realize that sometimes it's not the best fit. And I think it's okay to say that.
You know what? I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that story was about me.
Oh, there you go.
I was fired. One of my first jobs, I was fired, and it was because I would call in sick all the time. I'd show up late, and that's was a really good. Oh, and here's the worst part about that. My mom got me that job. It was one
Uh-oh.
of her friends.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
really tough then.
yeah, it was really bad. So, I mean, and I think at that point was when I really developed such a strong work ethic, because that was a tough lesson, you know?
Yep, yep. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's no harder lesson, I think, than the ones where we have to look inward and realize how bad we screwed up.
Yeah.
I
But we
mean,
all screw up.
yeah, right. And after a while, I think it becomes easier because you realize the world didn't end, you know? Um, and life goes on. No matter how bad you screw up, life is always going to go on. You just have to, you can't really control the things that happen in life. You can only control how you deal with them. And,
Hmm.
and we all get better at that at time.
Yeah.
My reaction might not have been the best then, but it can definitely get better kind of thing.
Well, and I'm a firm believer in learning from your mistakes, right? I know one of the sayings, "Fell forward,"
Yep.
do it scared.
Absolutely. Terrified, the better. Well, we are bumping up close to our time here, but if you absolutely show everybody your journal, and
Oh,
let's
yeah.
let's give that another plug.
So it's called Awaken Your Potential. And
There
it's going to
you go.
help you get to know yourself, right?
And figure out there's that assessment's in there, right?
Yes, there is a list of resources at the very beginning. It's basically a list of all the books that I've read that have led to these strategies being put together to help you get more done with your day. And the assessment is also listed in there.
Perfect. So if you want to leave anybody else with other parting words, and of course, I'll put a link to you and your book and all that stuff in the podcast title. But if you could leave everybody with parting words, what would you say to folks?
I would say mindset is everything. And you get to choose, or you can co-create your reality with every choice that you make. And what I mean by that is how you choose to view each situation is what creates your perception of reality. So think about that the next time you're feeling down and out.
There you go. There you go. Well, everybody, thanks again for listening. We hope to have you back on another edition of this podcast. But thank you so much, Casey, for your time. We appreciate you. For the rest of you, have a great day.
Thanks for having me.